That's about all the Demacia lore that I can get into 10 minutes. There's a little bit more, but this was a lot.
And that's where I come in. So Matt over there, Sir Superhero, just gave a pretty good potted history of Demacia and everything that's going on with it. But of course, being 10 minutes, he only had so much time to talk about so many things, so let me fill in a few of the blanks. Say hello to Poppy. Poppy is a Yordle, and she is probably the most important hero of Demacia. Now, Poppy is old, almost 1,000 years at the very least, and she was present at the very founding of Demacia. Back right in the aftermath of the Rune Wars, when refugees were collecting in the lands that would become Demacia, she ran into a man named Orlon, who was a powerful hero, a man who wielded an enormous warhammer, and who was an incredibly important, inspirational character in the founding and the building of Demacia back then. On his deathbed, after a lifetime of friendship with Poppy, he revealed to her that the hammer that he wielded, his iconic, powerful warhammer, had never really belonged to him. It is a hammer that was prophesied to belong to the true hero of Demacia, a person who will defend the nation in its absolute darkest hour, and he begged Poppy to take the hammer and go complete the quest that he could not and find that hero. And so, Poppy did. She has been traveling all over Demacia for nearly 1,000 years, looking for someone, anyone who is worthy to wield the hammer. And of course, the tragic joke of her story is that Poppy is constantly searching for a hero who is worthy to wield the hammer, but in the process of doing that, she herself has wielded the hammer in many righteous and glorious pursuits, defending the innocent, protecting the weak, defeating, dragons that attack villages, and she is, of course, the hero of Demacia, but she's too humble ever to see it or ever to admit it to herself. Now, the thing about Yordles is that they are intensely magical creatures. They are fundamentally connected to magic as living beings, and as such, Yordles are not very welcome in the modern state of Demacia. In fact, in the Mage Seeker game from Riot Forge, the Mage Seekers keep a Yordle in an underground prison to torture her in order to gain information about how Yordle magic works, because, well, they're doing all kinds of messed up experiments in that game, and so Poppy's status in Demacia, despite being its most important and powerful hero, despite having protected the populace for 1,000 years, she's not really welcome in a lot of places. Not that that bothers her particularly, but that's the state of Demacia as it is. And it's important to note that Demacia's anti-magic sentiment certainly grew out of its history, but in modern times in the League of Legends timeline, the rise and ascendancy of the Mage Seekers and their incredible power in Demacian society, their ability to simply take away people and lock them in prison forever, Demacia wasn't always like that. There was a long period of history in Demacia where mages were accepted as refugees, same as anyone else, because, well, they were also on the run from the Rune Wars, and the Rune Wars happened not because of magic, but because of the World Rune artifacts themselves. Like, ordinary mages simply do not have access to the kind of power that a World Rune has access to, so most people, rationally, didn't see them as threats. The rise of anti-magic extremism is a deliberate political process that has been undertaken by the Mage Seekers as a political organization within Demacia. They used to be sort of a fairly minor component of Demacia's justice system, who were only dispatched for crimes that specifically involved mages, but they've gathered to themselves more and more power, led in part by this man, Eldred Crownguard, who is the uncle of Lux and Garen, the two champions from League of Legends, who led the Mage Seekers up until he was recently murdered, or, well, killed, rather justifiably, I would say, by Silas after having tortured poor Silas for many years and committed unspeakable acts of torment and torture against many of the mages that he was imprisoning. But the act of inflaming anti-magic sentiment in Demacia is very explicitly and specifically a deliberate political process that is undertaken by the nobility, by the highest echelons of society. In general Demacian society, especially once you get outside of the cities, out into the countryside, most people are sort of fine with mages because everyone kind of knows one who lives down the street and who only ever really uses their limited ability to do water magic to water their crops or whatever. Like, most people have no problem with mages. This is very much a top-down sort of social bigotry that's being spread by people who stand to have something to gain from it. Which leads us on to this terrible character design, probably the most important character that Matt didn't have time to talk about. This is Jarvan IV, the current king of Demacia. He's the son of Jarvan III, the former king of Demacia, who died very, very recently. He died, in fact, right around the time when Silas was doing his uprising and rushing the palace with a group of revolutionary mages. But Jarvan III was not killed by the revolutionary mages. He was slain by a Noxian assassin who was using the revolution as cover to make sure that nobody knew, like, exactly who it was who had killed the king. And it was the Mage Seeker faction within Demacia, within the political factions of Demacia, who were very happy just to pin the crime on a convenient mage as a means of inflaming the population, and especially as a means of controlling the young King Jarvan IV and ensuring that he would not be engaging in the conciliatory politics of his father. Jarvan III had made the decision to extend amnesty and immunity and more reconciliation with the mage population of Demacia, rolling back a lot of the Mage Seeker faction's power. Jarvan IV, who is now blaming the death of his father on a mage, is a lot more aggressive in pursuing anti-mage legislation and anti-mage action and giving the Mage Seeker faction power. So they are perfectly happy not to investigate the death of the king too closely. Now, all of this, thematically speaking, goes back to this woman. This is Kayle. She's the daughter of the aspect of justice and represents one half of that which is justice within the League of Legends universe, which is law, principles, and strict obedience to authority. These are the things that Kayle represents. You can think of her as the perfect representation of lawful in D&D terms. Kayle is someone who believes that the law must be followed, authority must be obeyed, and any failure to do either of those things must be met with absolute punishment, which is to say, essentially, Kayle favors throwing people into prison forever or killing them if they do something to violate the principles of justice. Now, Kayle has a twin sister, Morgana, who represents the other half of justice, which is to say mercy, compassion, forgiveness, rehabilitation, restorative justice. These are the things that fall under her domain. A long time ago, the two twin sisters had a fight. Kayle won, and she essentially went on to become the spiritual leader of Demacia, for a time, at least. And Demacia patterned itself very much after Kayle's beliefs, ideals, and the way that she sees the world, while Morgana faded into the background and became a figure known as the Veiled Lady, a sort of a legendary figure of justice that is mostly prayed to in the Demacian countryside. And this is why Demacia looks the way it does. All over the iconography of Demacia, you will find these recurring symbols. The wing, the sword, the angel. These are the signifiers of Demacia's upper class and of its nobility, and it all comes from Kayle. It all comes from that fundamental conflict between visions of justice, where the authoritarian, the hardline, the inflexible version of that won through, and that has resonated down the ages to the current state of Demacia, where authority, where like this slavish devotion to a particular ideal of justice holds sway and power in Demacia, where ideas of tolerance, nuance, and compassion are quickly being essentially eliminated from the country because it is useful to those in power for those principles not to find foothold. Poppy is one of the sweetest characters in all of League of Legends. She's so humble, she's so kind, she's so nice. She goes out of her way to help anyone who might be in need, and she doesn't give a damn where they're from or what they might have done in their past. She is eminently forgiven, and it is important to remember through the themes and the lore of Demacia that she is the hero of Demacia. She is the purest embodiment of what the country ideally should be, and the Mage Seekers are an evil and genuinely very cruel subversion and opposition to everything that Poppy stands for. If you want to believe in Demacia, you have to believe in Poppy.